Hello and welcome to the InnoFrontier podcast. I'm so pleased today to be joined by Thomas Hatch, who's currently serving as the Director of Engineering over at VMware, but has had a long history of entrepreneurial success and other success leading other dev teams in some pretty cool companies that we'll get in. So, Thomas, thank you so much for meeting with us here today. To kind of start everything off, would love to learn a little bit about how you got interested in technology. What was it that kind of made you realize that this was going to be your path?
Before you get going, I guess I'll correct one thing. So so Broadcom bought VMware last week,
Oh, amazing.
and yeah, so currently I'm a distinguished engineer at Broadcom. I guess there's a lot of dust that's still settling, and I, for obvious reasons, can't talk very much about what's going on. Um, but that's been a really crazy transition. It's interesting how you open up by asking about kind of where I started. I remember years ago I got my first job as a software engineer working for the U.S. intelligence community, and I remember coming home and looking at my title, and my job title was engineer. I was so excited just to be called an engineer. And now I'm working as a distinguished engineer inside of Broadcom. Still trying to figure out exactly what that means, but it's been an incredible journey through so many different companies and projects and organizations, and going all the way back to basically, for the most part, teaching myself how to code. I don't have a college degree in software engineering. I don't have a college degree, and to be in the position I am is uh, given where I started is kind of a crazy thing, because when I was a kid, I was the dumb one. Um, Everybody else in my family has master's degrees. My little brother just got his PhD, and I'm the dropout. But at the same time, doing really well because technology. And the great thing about technology is that it rewards you for the effort that you put into it, and how much you learn and how much raw work you just dedicate. And so, yeah, I mean, I was building computers as a teenager. I learned Linux. I taught myself Linux early on, just because I thought it was cool. And that kind of early introduction into technology, just saying this is cool, I'm going to play with it until I figure it out, is really what took me from knowing absolutely nothing to getting some of those first system admin jobs before I was an engineer, working for companies like backcountry.com, and a startup called Beyond Oblivion, that was doing music streaming, and learning a lot along the way before making Salt, and all that stuff changing around. But yeah, so it's been a crazy ride to kind of. I never thought, if you would have asked me 15 years ago if I'd be sitting in this kind of chair at a big company like Broadcom, never would have imagined it.
So, lots to unpack there. Wanted to first start by what was the first thing, as you taught yourself Linux, what was the first project that you did just kind of on your own?
Well, the first thing that I did was a buddy of mine gave me an old copy of SUSE Linux, and this is like 2002. And I was under the impression that, oh, this Linux stuff is magic. I install it. It's a desktop Linux in 2002. Complete disaster, right? Thing barely ran. Firefox kept crashing, and I was like, this is some kind of joke. But it just did gnawed on me in the back of my head. No, I just have to learn this. I didn't have a project. I wasn't building anything. I just wanted to learn how computers worked, and they said this. Then everybody said that was the stuff, and so I played around with it. Uh, from a project perspective, once I got things going, I would go down to the University of Utah surplus store, and pick up just whatever old cheap computers I could get, because I hardly had two nickels to rub together, to use an old man term, and just get some Pentium 3s that are running 800 megs to a gigahertz, and install Linux on them over and over and over again until I figure stuff out, install network stuff, and just kind of say, I just want to make it work. Yeah, I didn't have much of a goal. So yeah, sorry, not the best answer to the question.
No, I thought that was great. When you started working as an engineer officially, you finally got that cool title. At what point was it that you realized that you were going to be an entrepreneur? Because you started the very, very successful company, SaltStack, and from the Utah landscape, very technically complex company. In fact, there's not a lot of companies that have come out of Utah that are that technically complex. Most are, really great companies, but as far as technology goes, much more sales engines than product led. At what point did you kind of realize, oh my gosh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur? We're going to start this company.
I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I remember being like 6 years old and talking about someday I'm going to make companies. And I didn't know what it meant, but I wanted it. And so I'm one of those guys who has kind of the has to make businesses illness. The crazy thing about Salt, right? I'd made a couple of ventures that were absolute disasters up until that point. I had a media replication company that was copying CDs. I tried to make a video game company that was a disaster. And the thing about Salt was that I'd gone to a bunch of different jobs at that point. I'd written automation platforms, and I just thought, I'm just going to write this open source so I don't have to rewrite it again when I get another job in 2 years. And so that's 2011, and I'm working on Salt. And then in November of 2011, I go on this podcast. Somebody in the very, very small Salt community at that point was like, hey, go on Randall Schwartz's podcast. And I'm like, and I'm way too arrogant about where Salt is at the time, which I generally would say is a good move. And, I'm making grandiose claims. Well, the community in between the beginning of November and the end of the year in 2011 went from like 5 or 6 people having given us code to over 70. And all of a sudden I'm speaking at conferences nonstop. And then the company I was working for, it was called Beyond Oblivion, and they fulfilled their name at the end of the year and went beyond Oblivion. And so I decided I'm going to try and make a company out of this. To be honest, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand at all from a business perspective what was going on. I just thought, I've got cool tech, I can make this work. And burned all my savings. And we raised money in August of 2012. And I had literally run out of money. Like my bank account was dry the couple of days before I got my first paycheck, right? I just was right at the end of my rope. And the amazing thing though was that we were able to get some investment capital in and start a crazy software company.
And over the course of the 10 years you ran Salt independently, of course, before it was acquired, what were some of the changes to the technology that you guys made and some of the changes to the product vision that you made over time?
So I had to grow up a lot and I had to learn a lot. I was not at all prepared. To be honest, if I did it again, I'd question how prepared I'd be. I'd love to make another tech company. I mean, for the record, but I am where I am. But the Salt as a technology quickly evolved into really tackling the DevOps space, and I learned after a few years that the open source model has a lot of really serious problems. Right, there are a lot of challenges to overcome when you're looking at open source software. And I've actually got a book that I'm really fairly close on getting finished that I call The Trinity of Open Source, which goes over what monetization looks like in open source from a much broader perspective, a much more open source plus business perspective, usually these books are very one-sided. And it goes over a lot of kind of that journey, but a lot of it was understanding that what I perceived and understood about open source wasn't entirely true. The benefits that we were getting from open source were very different from what I expected. The way to monetize and how customers would come into your customer ecosystem is very different from a user ecosystem. And then transitioning into VMware, and then even though I've only been at Broadcom for a very short time, transitioning into Broadcom, learning a lot about how, depending on kind of the direction of customer attraction, how you change your overall approach, not only to product, but also open source, has been really, really fascinating. So it's interesting moving from the early days of just throwing more features as something that I can shake a stick at, and now looking at things and saying, what does the overall business strategy need to look like to be able to drive people to this software, and how do I change how we function from an engineering perspective to be not only product oriented, but also facilitating really strong innovation. So no, it's been a crazy journey.
Well, and on that, when you look at how to take your product vision, as the founder of this, and then hiring people, and then eventually, I don't know how many engineers you guys actually had before you got acquired. How many engineers did you have total?
Our entire engineering department was right around 60 folks.
Wow. Okay, so you have 60 people. How do you translate that vision that you have for the product as, the leader, the person? How do you get that to the people that are down writing code? What were some of the things that you learned on how to do that throughout the whole organization?
Part of it is, honestly, it's accepting the fact that you can only do so much. And I would do it differently if I had to do it over again. But when you're communicating complex topics to a broad group of people, you need to do it. One, you need to present those in a simple way and repeat it over and over and over again. We call it a drumbeat a lot from a startup perspective. You've got to be beating that drum. And that drum has to really exude the entire tone, not only of the product vision, but of the business. Everything has to be very, very unified. And again, I'm saying this, I don't think I did that good of a job of that inside of SaltStack. I think I did okay, but I was learning. A lot of what you've got to do is be able to sit down and say, look, our targeted goals are here. Everybody in the business is working towards this. And one of the concepts that I developed inside of SaltStack is something I call mechanical accountability, where you come back and you say, look, the entire company or the entire division is working towards goal X. Goal X means that the product is going to look a certain way. Marketing is going to be in place. Sales is going to be in place. And that we've got the finances and the runway to get there with some safety. We've got certain external events that we need to adhere to. And the thing to do where I was most successful was when we would align all this stuff together, where we would say, there is a marketing event, there is a conference. At this conference, we need to be able to announce XYZ. We know that we want to announce XYZ because that is lined up with what our customers want. And that's also lined up with where we feel very strongly the business is going. We communicate to everybody in the company, the next 6 months are about XYZ. This is the goal. This is the timeline. Marketing is going to be aligning towards building up towards this message. Sales is going to be trained only at the right time so they don't preemptively sell the wrong thing. You know how sales goes. And engineering understands that they've got to hit this date because there is mechanical accountability. They're accountable not only because they've committed and they've agreed that they can do it, but they're accountable because there's an event, because there's marketing working towards this, there's sales working towards this. The entire company is moving in unison, and there's cross organization transparency. When you have that in place, everybody feels feels the momentum of the business that they're in. Everybody feels the momentum of the direction that you're going. And so it isn't just beating a drum, right? When we say get a drum beat, you're saying that to say, okay, leader, come on, get in front of your people and actually talk to them for a change. A lot of guys don't. But when you get to the point where you have mechanical accountability, where you have a fine dance between all of your areas of management and all of your areas of execution, driving towards targeted outcomes that are reasonable and can be met, then amazing things happen inside of a company. The hard thing is, of course, keeping up with that. And being able to be the kind of leader that can put that stuff together. We had only just started getting to the point where we were beginning to do this when we got acquired. And as I've seen it happen a little bit inside of VMware, and Broadcom, from what I can see so far, seems to be this kind of company. It's amazing how much more effective you are as a business, how you can just plow through problems so much more easily.
When, as you're plowing through those problems, you're specifically on Salt, and you're growing, you got to this point where after almost a decade, you were approached to sell the company. And this is a hard thing even for me to imagine, selling quality one day, but I know for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's what winds up happening. Either their companies go south or they get acquired. Statistically, that's what most likely happens. Can you tell us, as much as you can, just a little bit about what that experience was like? Like, how did you get connected to VMware? What was it that, as an entrepreneur with your baby, what was it that kind of made it make sense for you?
So we first really got on VMware's radar back in 2014. I've still got the award we got at VMworld for new exciting technology back in 2014, sitting on my desk, and from there on, we had ongoing conversations with a lot of different leaders of VMware over the years. Acquisition is rarely something that happens kind of out of the blue. It's something where you partner with, you work with the company for a long time, you are integrated into some of their products, and those people. Now, the crazy thing about Salt, of course, is that we're integrated into a lot of different companies. And so we had a number of situations where acquisition talks had started, and either we had walked away or something had happened on the other side. And when we were acquired by VMware, we actually had quite a few companies looking at us at the time, which was great. And a lot of that was because we had a lot of partnerships with a lot of different organizations. And so it's really interesting as they come in and they, see different value with different aspects of the business. A lot of the value that SaltStack, the company, brought to bear had to do with a large community and a large kind of sphere of influence. And then we combine that with, of course, with revenues. And then the way a company values you for acquisition has to do with how synergistic those values of your company are to theirs. Are they going to come in and say, okay, the prime product that you're working towards makes a lot of sense with us? Or are they going to come in and say, this other aspect of your business makes sense? And they're going to pay you for what they want, unless they have to pay you for your market, for kind of an overall market value. And so it's interesting, again, how those negotiations go over, because that perceived value for a private acquisition of a company like that is very interesting. And I've said interesting too many times. But the other thing, from the perspective of just selling a company, for people who it's their first company, I would kind of encourage, be willing to sell, right? You go through it and you learn a lot building one of these things. So if you're able to kind of get the money out of it and move on with your life to a certain extent, there's a lot to learn and a lot of opportunities to grow with on the other side. I'd always say, people say, oh, it's your baby. And I'm like, well, my baby's got to go to college. My baby's got to get a job and move out, right? I don't raise my kids to coddle them till I die. I raise my kids to be adults. And so my company should be too. And it's not a business. If it owns you, you got to own it.
Wow, that is powerful. That is powerful stuff. Um, so then you joined VMware. Can you talk with us a little bit about, VMware's done a lot of different acquisitions. They probably have a little bit more of infrastructure around this, but I've seen a few acquisitions where, they'll acquire a company and literally a year later they will just kill the product because they don't have the infrastructure in order to manage that. What were some things that you liked about the integration, as much as you can tell, obviously, about the integration between Salt and VMware? Is it still kind of operating as a more independent business unit? Like, how did that work?
So Salt is it's a very powerful automation engine. And since it's an engine, it makes sense to put it under the hood of a lot of cars. And so that's very much what VMware has done. Salt is now part of quite a few different products inside of VMware and now inside of Broadcom. And we continually became more and more and more ingrained in more products throughout all of VMware's offerings. And this made us a very, very powerful and very sticky entity inside of VMware. And it's interesting, just as you're saying, different products will function different ways inside of an acquisition. When you're getting acquired, a larger company has products that have a significant amount of gravity. Okay. And that gravity that those products have has to do with not only the company's culture and their view of the importance of those products, but also, of course, the revenue and the customer streams. Everybody wants to attach to those. A lot of companies that get acquired, the people that get acquired come in and say, well, I just want to operate as myself. And one of the things that's been very fascinating sitting in VMware is looking at a bunch of the different acquisitions and how many of them very much so did function in a very independent fashion, and how many of them sought aggressively to be deeply integrated into other products and to follow the gravity to a certain extent. You've got to carve your own path inside of a larger company, but you also need to follow the gravity. And some of the businesses that were acquired by VMware that didn't follow that gravity as much, didn't integrate as much. And some of them aren't as valued right now inside of Broadcom, and frankly, they weren't as valued inside of VMware. Whereas when we've been able to tightly integrate in a lot of different ways, we've become integral, right, to so many different components inside of VMware, now Broadcom, that we've been able to function in a more strategic way. And so again, the journey doesn't stop when you get acquired. And I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm still here. I mean, another part is that I was strongly persuaded. I shouldn't talk about that in too much depth, but I want to be able to see the things that I've made live on and have a strong influence and get installed and deployed more and more and more. And so that's what you do. Being acquired isn't just getting a check and running off necessarily. It's all about making sure that you can push more technology in a positive way to as many customers as you can.
Powerful. As you look forward a little bit, there's been a lot of recent changes in your life with having this Broadcom acquisition. What do you see over the next, couple of years as far as maybe cool technology initiatives or, other things that maybe are before you in your future?
So, I mean, if I'm honest, I am an entrepreneur. It's in my blood. I can't not be an entrepreneur. I've got I'm invested in a burger place in American Fork called Burgers and Barley.
No way,
I've
I just
dabbled a
went there
little.
last week.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
uh, and let's see. I've got some Filecoin cryptocurrency mining operation going on right now. And I've got a lot of companies that I have consulted, and some of them are just friends that I work with. And so, I mean, there's all that going on. I've got ideas for new companies, but at the same time, Broadcom is taking very good care of me and my team. And so, from a technology perspective, there's a lot of debate there. Overall, I'm an infrastructure guy. And infrastructure right now has gotten a really big upset from artificial intelligence. It's also gotten a really big upset because of a lot of the big complexities that come with cloud. And I'm surprised how many organizations have been moving away from public cloud, have been saying that they've struggled a lot with public cloud and some of the more complex public cloud components like some of the containerization technologies out there, some of the management technologies out there. And then also, there's been such a dramatic shift in open source. We've come back and we've seen Salt, of course, being open source, but we've come back and we've seen recent changes with Red Hat as they've restricted the publication of their sources, the changes with HashiCorp bringing their components into BSL licenses. And it's been really fascinating to me to watch how the overall funding ecosystem has shifted so much. Even the Linux Foundation and guys working on the Linux kernel have recently said that they're struggling to keep up with maintainership. And that macroecological shift with artificial intelligence coming in on one end, an increasingly fragile, large open source ecosystem that we're all built on, and showing some cracks, and then combining that with the question about, are there ways to simplify complex infrastructure, is really where my mind is at right now, and wondering, are there ways that we could simplify complex infrastructure? What if we could make it so that deploying applications wasn't as frankly ridiculous as it is now? And if some of the new AI systems are going to be able to help with that, or not, or if they are going to continue to be novelties like they are now, or if we're going to see real breakthroughs. So, I think that we have to see solutions to complex infrastructure, but I don't see companies necessarily doing a really good job of paving the way forward or coming up with really new innovative ways of doing it. We're grappling with an insanely complicated infrastructure setup and a ton of different tools, and we need things to navigate those tools right now because we haven't been able to come up with a simplified model.
Well, that's really powerful. And I know we're almost at time, but I did have one more question for you. This might be leaning a little bit more into the purpose of your book, but where do you see AI and open source finding that synergy? At least in the short term, I empathize with you that so much of what AI is right now is cool, but solving complex infrastructure systems, really getting into some of these, I mean, it's just not even close. But where do you think that bridge is for AI and open source?
AI and open source has been really, really interesting lately because open source software is getting harvested by AI, like pretty much everything on the web. The quote unquote open source licenses that are being used are not your traditional licenses oftentimes. And then organizations that are using open source licenses for their AI are they don't necessarily have the same they don't have the same money behind them, right, as going in and looking at Facebook, for instance. And so what we're seeing is that you've got real questions about not only the licensing around artificial intelligence, but also the licensing around what it produces and what it can harvest. And this is going to change the open source landscape dramatically because open source software is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. It's shifted away from what I would call the innovation boom of the last decade in open source into a maintainership role and an economic growth mindset. And these sorts of shifts, when we combine them with AI, really mean that a lot of the reason it's happening is because the venture money is going into AI now, right? The venture money isn't going towards open source projects anymore. And that was fueling a huge amount of the open source growth when revenue should have been fueling that open source growth. And oftentimes it wasn't. And now that money is shifted. And so a lot of these open source organizations are struggling or needing to make dramatic changes. And subsequently, the AI push is really gray as to how it's going to be applied in a lot of cases. I mean, what you guys are doing is fantastic because quality is focused on a very targeted solution. But so much of what is happening in AI land is the big platform wars. And until we have really effective targeted solutions that are human consumable, we're not going to see what a lot of the future brings. Once those targeted solutions evolve, I would say we're going to see a resurgence in how open source responds and a resurgence in targeted open source solutions that follow on the heels of more and more of these larger systems. But at that point, I also think that the ecosystem around open source is going to evolve. The licenses are going to change again. And the way that we consume open source will shift again. So all in all, I see a lot of change, and I probably just don't have enough time to go into a lot of detail on where I think a lot of the levers are that are going to be pulled over the next few years.
Well, thank you for that insight. I mean, so much to think about. This is an ever-evolving landscape, and it's been amazing to have great examples, like yourself, to go forward and to build really cool, amazing, technically complex companies. We're trying to emulate that and to hopefully have some success as you guys have. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It means so much, and your mentorship has meant so much for us over here at Quality. So thank you, and can't wait to sync up again.
Okay, thanks. Yep, and I'm excited about what you guys are doing. Keep it up.
You bet.